All right. Hello, everybody. This is going to be the last video for the book arts class this semester, and it is for the long stitch binding. I'm going to show you sort of a more playful version of this. This can be very formal. You can do it with leather. Your cover can be made from leather, and you can sew through that cover. But instead of that, we're going to do something a little more playful that you could access easier from your home, and that is just using a product box to do this stitch. So I have some finished examples here that I've done over the years. Um, you can punch your sections into different, numbers. So this one has 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Most of the time I do 4. This one's 5 as well. But most of the time when I teach this, I do 4 stations. So that's what I'm going to do today is just 4. It depends on how you're sewing. I'm sorry. It depends on the number of stations that you have, how you might go around one end versus the other end of the book. So like here and here, it's a little different depending on the number of stations that you have. That's a technical thing. And I've provided you guys a handout for this binding, and you should be able to once you follow the tutorial, I think if you decided to do one with 5 or 6, or it's even versus odd number of stations, if that makes sense. It doesn't right now, but when you've done it one time through, you will understand what I'm talking about. We're going to do an even number. We're going to do 4. If you do an odd number, it's the way that you go around at the end, and the way that you add the sections in is a little bit different. And it's so slight. Once you understand it one way, you would understand it for the other number. So that's kind of a long explanation, but I just wanted to show a few examples of this before we start doing it. It's really pretty simple. It's a fun binding to learn, because then you start going, oh, I like this box. I don't want to throw it away, but what am I going to do with it? Well, you could do something like this with it. And there's other bindings that you could do that kind of thing with as well. So I've got a piece of cardboard. This is a Satch squared pizza box. I'm not going to use this one, but I did want to show you that you could do that. It's just a little bit harder to do because you have to punch through a thickness of cardboard, but that's just regular box cardboard, maybe even a little thinner than normal because it's just a pizza box, not for shipping or anything. That's what I mean. But you have to cut through, and it can get a little bit messy. So I don't really think that's a good thing to do for the first one that you ever do. So I decided not to use this one, but I cut this one. We're going to do our same measurement, the 5.5 by 4.25. So I cut this one to that height, because at first I thought, oh, I'll do that. And then I thought, no, this is too hard to do the first time through. So I'm going to use a cereal box instead. So one thing I'm not going to demonstrate, because we've done it so many times, I just don't think that I need to demonstrate this, is cutting down the sections. So I've already pre-prepped my sections over here that we're going to punch and sew into the cover. So I have 8 of them. That's what you need. You need 8 sections of 4 sheets each. So 1, 2, 3, 4 that you're just, so you would rough cut them, fold them in half, and then trim them down using. So I'm going to do 1 just to remind you, but I'm not going to do all 8 because I just don't think that you need. And you can also do a varied number of sections in a book too. So you don't have to do 8. 8 is good because then you can at least see the sewing out here. But I've done more, and you can see what, like with this one, I used paper bags as my pages. So any kind of paper, you can iron it flat. Like I use shipping material a lot. Like I'll take it and flatten it and use it as pages in a blank book. And I think this one also has some kind of packing material in it. Yeah, this one's got a piece of tape on it. It's kind of, it looks like it's made from recycled parts because it is. So yes, you can do 8, you can do 10. You start getting more than that, and it might get too wide to stay flat. But you can do as many sections as you would like. But we're going to do 8 for this demonstration. Now, so this is again the 5.5 by 4.25. These are my folded sections. This is just my little rough cut fold. It looks pretty neat, but it's actually not. These are just pages that I had and I folded. And so then you could just do what you always do. which is line this up. And you know how usually I'll put a board down here and jog this up to the board, but for just this quick demo, just as a reminder, I'm going to turn this over because there's a corner cut. I'm going to turn it like this. Just for this little quick reminder, if you need to watch the whole thing, go back to the multi-section flatback. You could go back to the drum leaf, although that's not a section, that's just single folios. I'm trying to think what else we did that for. The pamphlets, we folded up sections. So again, I'm just cutting it flush. And if you had access to a cutter, you could always just cut this to size using the cut trimmer or some other kind of paper cutter. So this is just the hand cutting method. Sharp blade, as always, cut through 3 or 4 times. And then, oops, didn't get it right here. I think it's right at the corner. Yeah, one more time here. Just keep holding it in place until you've really got it cut, and then there you go. Okay, so that's what you're going to do that for 8 sections. So it's 8 sections of 4 folios nested together, folded and trimmed like this. Okay, so I don't even need that section, but I just wanted to show you just in case. All right, so what we've got to do is you're going to have your sections already ready. And then you're going to cut out a piece of board that is the same height as this, which is 5.5. And then you just want to make sure that you have enough board to, if you think about what we're going to do, you just need it to be big enough to cover and be able to trim out here at the foredge. So we'll probably just sew it in there without the trimmed cover because you won't know what size it is until you're done. You could, I mean, that's not true. You would know what it is and you could measure using one of your text blocks and go ahead and trim it flush. But I usually cut it a little bit larger and leave that foredge until I'm completely done with the sewing. Then for this binding, at least for the product box version of this, I do that. But you just need to make sure you have enough board for this. So like if I just roll this, I have way more than enough. So I have the width of the book, one width. I have the width, I have enough height, and I have enough thickness. So if I roll that book, you imagine the cover, the spine, and the back cover. Okay, so I have plenty of material. But I do want to square this up because I can tell I just cut that with scissors and it needs to be squared up. So I'm going to take one. I really want this to be the cover of my book. So I'm going to square that. I kind of like that little General Mills logo up there. So I'm not going to cut that completely off. So I'm just squaring it up right now. And I can't square it all the way across because my triangle isn't long enough. But then I can turn it this way, and I already made one cut. I can go ahead and cut it. And sometimes what I'll do is just go ahead and just make a little tick mark, and then I can use my ruler. I'm going to move it up just a little bit because I feel like I wasn't in the right spot. So I'm squaring it here, and I'm going to make a pencil mark here and a pencil mark here so that then I can make my tick marks and then square it using my ruler. That's better, yeah, because I think to try to do that in little stages at the height is not going to work. Okay, so now I have one corner that is square. I could go ahead and square this one as well. Maybe I'll do that just to, because this is, I really want to keep that corner. And so this one's really wobbly because it's straight here, but then it's not thick enough here. But I'm going to go ahead, just take my pencil, make tick marks. So I'm squaring this whole sheet because I'm just really thinking about how I want to use and what I want the book to look like. All right, so if I really want this corner to be the corner of my book, I could go ahead and maybe I could allow a little bit of trim. Um, I know that the finished size of this is 4 1/4. So I can just double check it. 4 1/4. And so that's how wide I want that to be. So on the back side of this, I could, and maybe I'll do it at, I'll add a 1/16 on there just to allow me a little bit of wiggle room. If something goes awry while I'm sewing, I can still have a little bit of trim room. So I'm going to add a 1/16 to that 4 1/4. And then I'm going to mark some tick marks here because I'm going to go ahead and score the spine for the first fold. I guess I'll go ahead and do that because I haven't made my height yet, but this won't hurt since I kind of got ahead of myself. But I'm going to go ahead and do it. So I'm going to use my little folder. This is my scoring. And you can also use your awl. Maybe I'll do the awl because that's what I've been doing with you guys. Don't want to poke into it, but I'll just lay the head there. Find the other mark. I feel like something's not right. It doesn't look straight. I think I might have mismeasured because I'm thinking ahead of what I'm doing, and that's never good. So it was 4 1/4, but I forgot to add the 1/16 here, I think. 4 1/4 plus a 1/16 is here. I don't know what I just did. I think I just did a 1/16 more than 4, so that's not right. It should be 4 1/4 and a 1/16. 4 1/4 plus a 1/16. Yeah, that's correct. So watch what you're doing. But just look, before you start scoring, look and kind of eyeball, okay, that didn't look straight. So I caught myself, so that was lucky. Okay, so I'll score here. And this is going to be the exterior of my book, so I can go ahead and kind of crease it. So you want to be a little gentle just because these coated papers like this can crack very easily. So you just kind of gently fold it because we don't need to get crazy with it right now. So here's the other thing with this. You have to kind of measure how thick you want this thing. And what I usually do is just kind of lay my book in there. And here's the thing too, let me show you on these examples. You can kind of slide the sections around. Nothing's glued. So you can kind of make it any width and then slide them into position as you're sewing. But you do want to make sure I guess if you got it like twice as wide, it would not look good because these things would be kind of hanging individually instead of sitting there like a text block. So you don't want to go too wild with that idea, but you can see because this paper is kind of fluffy and has a lot of those wrinkles in it, I allowed a little bit of space there. So this is kind of you can almost guess a little bit at how wide you think this should be. So sometimes I'll do what I was doing, which is fold up one side and I'll place it in there and then I'll just make a little tick mark in there, what I think it should be the width. And I'll just make a little tick mark inside. This is inside the case. And then I can see what that is. I can just check it. And it's about 3/4, which I thought probably it was from looking at these other ones that they're about 3/4 wide. So I need to know that because I'm going to make a punching jig that I'm going to use as a punching jig to punch my sections and also to punch these slots in the cover. So I'm going to use this thing twice. So this is this is a scrap piece of like handmade paper, but you could use that Bristol card. You need something a little bit rigid. You could even use a scrap off of the cereal box if you needed to for this process. And so this is going to be your punching jig. So it needs to be the width of that, whatever spine you decide to do. And so I'm going to go ahead because it's close to 3/4, very close. It's like a 32nd of an inch from that. So I'm going to go ahead and make it 3/4. So I'll go ahead and make a tick mark here. And at 3/4 here. So I can go ahead and score that. And I'm not going to fold it yet because I also do need to cut the height of this. I haven't done that yet. So I'm going to go ahead and score without folding. This is going to be my spine. Okay, so now before I go any further, I am going to cut the height because I want this to be the height here. So it's going to be 5.5. So I can just use my mat for that. I could also just measure down 5.5, tick mark, and do it that way too. But for this, I'm just kind of jumping around with whatever technique this time. So 5.5 and 5.5. Okay, actually, you know what? I'm going to go a little bit past it. Just it's a tiny bit taller. I've talked about this with other bindings. Make your the board just a tiny bit taller. Even if you're trying to be flush, I like to do it a little bit taller than that because that way, if the sections aren't perfectly cut and I accidentally kind of whipped one a little higher or something, especially when you're hand cutting, just allow for that just a tiny bit when you're cutting the height of the board. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this. Okay. All right, so now this is going to be my cover. I'm probably going to have to trim that once I've sewn it, but that's okay. And then I've got my width in here, and then I can cut this other side. And whatever I did here is probably just what I'll do on the other side too. So I think it was like 4 1/4 plus a 16th. And so I'm going to do that on this side as well. 4 1/4 plus a 16th. 4 1/4 plus a 16th. I've made that mistake before. Four and a quarter. That's 5/16. Okay. This is not the finished cut, but it's real close to it, and I'll show you how to do that once we're done sewing. Next, I'm going to punch the sections. Well, I got to make the jig. So this, you know what? That might be cool to do. How much is this? A lot taller? And the only thing is that cutting that it's almost too tall. It's like a little, because I cut it a hair taller, that would actually be a little bit difficult to do. So I'm not going to use my scrap. I'm going to go ahead and cut a new one from this. That is the height of the text block. So now I can kind of set my cover aside for a few minutes because I'm going to work on punching my sections. So I need to cut a piece that this little scrap, I'm just going to cut that because it's folded. I'm going to cut this in half and use this blank side. So it needs to be 3/4 inch wide. So, but I'm going to go ahead and just cut this off. And since it's folded, just put my ruler up into that fold to get it lined up, and then I'll trim that. All my tools floating around. Okay, and then it needs to be 5.5 inches tall, like exactly. So I can put that on here. Five and a half right there. Now this time I'm going to cut it exactly to 5.5. And again, you could always use tick marks. You don't have to use the mat if you don't feel comfortable doing that. Okay. And then 3/4 inch wide. Now, so for this, I'm going to mark it because using the mat is too thin of a piece and I feel weird about it. So I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to do 3/4. And 3/4. And then I'm just going to cut off that little strip. So poke into one, line up the other one. And this way I'm putting the thicker side of material under the triangle. So there's my 3/4 wide by 5.5 inch tall piece. Move all these scraps out of the way. Okay, so now we're going to punch 4 sections. Okay, so that one's 5. Let's not look at that one. This one's 4. This is a little bit different size. So I determined the height of the book from the text block that I already prepared. So you could, again, this is like other books, you can make them any size you want to make them. I'm just making, because most of the books we made this semester are 5 1/4 by 4 1/2. No, 5 1/2 by 4 1/4. Um, that's why I try to just keep them consistent, because then you can have this little set of books that you made for this class and they're all the same size. And they're also, that's 1/4 of an 8 1/2 by 11. That's one little panel. If you folded it into fourths, that's a 1/4 size panel. So you could use like computer paper if you need to. Okay, again, so we're going to talk about 4 sections that we're going to punch. So that we're going to slot, but we're going to punch our sections in the same exact spot that we're going to make these slots, because we're going to use the same piece. So what we need to do is divide that into 4 areas. What I like to do is come down 5/8 of an inch on each end. That's going to be my first station. You can see here I made it a little bit more like an inch because it's a taller book. But I'm going to do 5/8 head and tail. 5/8 and 5/8. I don't know, that might be too close. I might need to do 3/4. I'm going to change it. I haven't cut anything, so I'm going to just erase those marks. I'm going to do 3/4 because I feel like it's going to be more comfortable. 3/4. And then I need to divide that in half. And so often I will find a center mark. So I'm going to use this as my center mark. Oh, you guys can't see. Let me know that. Sorry about that. So what I'll do is I have these 2 marks, and I will find the center of those 2. So it's right here. But I need to divide this actually into thirds. So that's a little harder to do because I don't want 5. Maybe do 5 normally. You know what? Maybe we should just do 5. Oh, honestly, that's perfect because they're going to be an inch apart. Okay, so I came down 3/4. That's what we're going to do. Oh, well, I'm going to change it on the fly. We're going to do 5 instead of 4. So you're going to come down 3/4 on each end, and then at inch mark increments, we're going to split that up. Okay, so that's going to make it, that's going to be nice. We'll do that. And then I'm going to cut my little V's out like I normally do for punching. So I'm just cutting. I will show this closer to the camera once I make these cuts in one direction. So you can see I made the cuts in the one direction like this all the way up the piece like that. And then I'll do them at the other angle to remove the material. Okay, like that. Okay, so I'm going to mark one of these, the head. I'm not sure it really matters because this is very symmetrical. And now I'm going to go ahead and punch my sections. So I just want to make sure that every time I'm putting this in, I'm putting it in the same direction. And it doesn't really matter which direction as long as you're conscious of it and you know what is what. Actually, I'm going to put the H on this side too, just so I can keep it in the orientation for the camera like that. Okay, so I'm going to put this into each section one at a time, and then I'm going to do our punching where you put the awl in at a 45-degree angle, get into that fold and punch straight through. And I am definitely going to have to open up these holes when I get to the sewing, but that's okay because I'm just trying to pierce it right now. I'm not super worried about, making sure I've gone all the way through. As long as I've pierced it, and I can tell too that I kind of missed it a little bit. So before I go on, I'm actually going to take it. I am going to open them up now because I feel like I wasn't in the right spot at the spine. Because, this is not easy to do. It'd be better to use a punching trough. Yeah, this is okay. All right. So just go through all 8. and punch your sections. So I'll do another one. I'll do another one on camera, and then I'm gonna just do them off camera because I'm trying to make a shorter video this time for this last project. So what I'm doing, if you need to be reminded, is at every little V station, I'm just kind of lining up my all with that V and then poking in, lining up and poking in. And I'm holding it just tight as I can. I kind of have to flip my hand because I can't get to that lower one underneath my hand. And then once I've got it, I move this out of the way and then just kind of re-punch. Although I kind of got a better feel for it after the first one. So I feel like I'm all right with this one. Okay. So then I'm making sure I keep them in the same orientation. So you're going to have all 8 punched like this. Okay. And you should have 5 holes instead of 4, like we were talking about. We're going to do 5. So you're going to punch all 8, and I'm going to pause the recording, do that, and then come back, and then we'll go on to the next step. So be right back after we punch. Okay. So now you've punched all your sections. They should look something like this. All 8 punched. Okay. So now we've got to transfer this measurement and this slot to the cover. So what we're going to do is, you can see where I've scored one line and I scored the other one. I just haven't folded it. So I'm going to go ahead and fold that up. I'm still just kind of doing it lightly. It doesn't actually ever need to be crisply folded because it's always going to stay like this. So I'm just trying not to break the box because it doesn't look good if that happens. And it's already going to be a little bit messy because we're punching through an uncoated paper into a coated, and they're somehow laminated together, but they tend to want to peel apart. Okay, so what we've got to do is we've got to punch holes into the cardboard on each side. So we're going to use those little V's to guide us. And what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to poke a hole straight down at the peak of the V. Hopefully I've made these approximately in the same position, because I don't want to poke. Let me just hold it up to the camera. This is going to be a little bit hard to do, hard to see. I'm not going to do it, but I'm going to talk about this. You don't want to poke into the fold. You want to put your awl or your needle, whatever it is you're using to punch with, into the peak of that triangle that you've cut and poke straight down. And that's why if these should probably be about the same place. You want to be about a 1/16 of an inch at least away from the fold. You don't want to punch a hole right up against the edge here. You want to come in a little bit. So you could also, another thing to do, if you're feeling like I can't see what I'm doing, I don't like this, you could also just make a pencil mark. And then that actually might be, let's do it this way. Let's make a pencil mark because this is just hard to explain. You really want to keep them in the same spot. Okay, so I'm just making like a little poke, but with my pencil instead of poking through. And now I can look at it and determine how close they are. Those pencil marks are away, if you can see here. There's one, and they're pretty close to being in the same distance from the fold. If you look, that one's a little bit close, so I could probably come out a little bit more like here. I shouldn't do it on the camera, but anyway, you see what I'm talking about now. That's easier to see with the pencil mark. So that's what you want to do, is poke your holes. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So this is the head. This is where I started because I was doing it that direction. I kind of flipped it over. And you could also do that. You could write in here. Oh, that's not the head. Uh-oh. Wait, what did I do? Well, it doesn't really matter, does it? It doesn't matter for this because it's so symmetrical. It doesn't matter. But I'm just trying to remember which way I pierced, which direction. And then here. Okay. So I haven't even really poked all the way through. I've just pierced it. You can see Those are now holes. They look just like the pencil marks, but I actually poked through. Okay, so I think what I did was that. Let me just double check them. Yep, they're in the right spot. Okay, so now what I want to do is I poke like this, okay, with the holes facing the left. Now I'm just going to flip this over like that so that the V marks are facing the right. And I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to do the same thing with the pencil mark because I felt like I could see better this way. There are other ways to do this. I've also made, like, you can make a little punching jig with holes already pierced, lay it in here and go right in there. And if you were making an edition, like if you were making a bunch of these books, that's probably going to be your better idea because it'll hold up better and you'll be more precise with it. But for this one-off, I just kind of felt like, let's just make one jig. Let's make life simpler for right now. Okay, so I just made those marks. For some reason, when I do this stuff, I tend to drop it down too low. So I don't like what I just did. It's just one of those days, y'all. And I'm going to do it again. I just looked at them and they're slanting down, like this, flat, you know, off. So I'm going to do it again. I'm going to lay that in there and make sure that this is up to the top. So I feel like that's what I was doing. Wrong. Okay, so I'll transfer them in. That's a smart way to do it with the pencil because then you can correct it if you do make a mistake. Because if you already punched, you kind of can't fix it. So now I'm just checking that everything looks straight. Now that's better. So now I can pierce right at those marks. Okay. All right, so now I am going to go ahead and pierce all the way through. And I'm trying not to make too big of a hole, but I need to make, I don't even know what size to estimate, but it needs to be wide enough so that our thread isn't going to tear it up. So we want to, like, maybe I'm not going to the full thickness of the awl, but maybe 3/4 of the way down to pierce. And I'm actually going from the inside to the outside, and I'll show you why. And we're going to cut through and cut these slots. So I'm doing the other side now, and I'm just holding, I'm holding it in midair, which, you know, sometimes you have to do it. For something like this, you need to control it and look at what you're doing. So we pierced against the mat, and now we're going to hold it up to kind of push through here. Like that. Okay. So, and if you look, I've pushed through all of them. You can see that the box has kind of pushed up towards us, towards the camera. And that's where we're going to kind of put our ruler. So when I'm down on the mat doing this, you're not going to be able to see what I'm talking about as well. So I'm doing it here. But when I put my triangle up against this, that little bit of material is actually holding my triangles, which is great. That's what we want. So that's going to help guide us to cut that little slot. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do now is line up my triangle, and I'm just going to cut between those holes. Okay, so I just want to cut from like the top of one hole to the top of the other one. And this, you need a very sharp blade. It's going to be neater if you have a sharp blade. So I'm doing the top cut. I'm not going to do the bottom cut because I'm going to come back the other direction and do that. And because I'm right-handed, I'm holding it with my left and cutting on the top of those circles. So now I'll back up, go to the next set. And I'm trying not to overcut. It's hard not to. It's not that easy to control. But I'm trying to stop right on top of that circle. And so I'm going to cut this slot the width of those circles. Okay. So now I'm just going to rotate this direction so I can line it up on the other side. I'm not going to worry about popping the material out yet. I'm going to go ahead and just cut everything and then kind of one at a time work. It should come out pretty easy, but sometimes with that coated paper, it doesn't cut as clean as you'd like. I'm doing like 3 cuts down so I can feel the mat. So this one started coming out, but that's fine. It's really the circle that's not clean because it's kind of a puncture and not a cut. Okay. So now I'm going to go through, kind of flick out the material. So there you can see kind of where it gets a little bit messy, because then you can see, you know, kind of the board back there, that chipboard showing through. So yeah, there's a peeled piece. It peeled off the cover, the coated paper peeled. So better quality materials, which this is not, are going to look better because they're not going to do things like that. But that's kind of not the point of this one. This is more of a punk rock kind of DIY, you know, use repurposed materials type of thing. So, but it's still nice. It's still a cool little journal, and it's inexpensive to make. And if you can make it from, like, you know, somebody just loves some product and or beer or you know, some kind of pop tart or whatever, you know, they can make it from that, and it's fun to do. Okay, so there's that cut, and you can see how that's a little bit messy at the edges, but that's all right. Okay, so this is the front, this is the back. It can really go either direction. And now we're ready to sew. So we need our needle and thread. And so how much thread do we need? We have 8 sections. So it's going to be the height of the book times the number of sections. Let's add one more section just in case we get in a bind where we're running out of thread. So let's do 9 heights of the book. So we'll take our thread and we'll have our needle. So we'll take the thread and you're just going to pull out 9 heights. So again, I like to do that in a rough way, kind of like this. 1, 2. Ooh. There's a weird little rough spot in my thread, so I'm going to cut that off. I hate that when that happens. It's like a little weird knot. So I'm just going to cut that off and get it out of the way because it'll cause problems. All right, so start over. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, well, 9. Okay. So I'm going to put that away. And then I'm going to wax my thread with a little bit of beeswax. I usually take 1/2, so I'll kind of take it and wax one side and then turn it around and wax the other side. So I just take my thumb and hold it down, and I'm pulling it through the wax like that. Just a couple of times is enough. And you can see it kind of stiffens it just a tiny bit. It's not a lot. It's better. Those waxed threads can get so thick with wax that they kind of cause problems when you're trying to sew. So I prefer to just wax it myself like this. Okay, so just a couple times through in each direction. And then I'm going to lock on my thread. I can't remember if I showed this or not, but I'll do it this time. Let me move all this stuff out of the way because I don't want it to get tangled up while I'm sewing. I need my needle. And I'm just going to thread it. So I take it on, or take the thread through the eye of the needle. And then I'm going to take the short end of the thread and kind of push it down And then I'm going to push through the thread like that. I'm just doing it against my finger. I've seen people use like a bone folder to flatten it out and then push through like that. It makes it easier. But I think it's pretty easy anyway. So that's what you do. You can see it's just splitting the thread, and so I'm pushing the pointy side of the needle through, and then I pull the long tail down and it locks the thread on. So that way your needle's not going to come off while you're sewing. Okay. All right, so now what we're going to do is going to start sewing this. And I'm going to take a section and I'm going to just check that it is correct. And because this is symmetrical, it should be fine. Then I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to open up all of the holes. Even though I sort of did that when I punched them, I still feel like I need to do it. You see, like that one's kind of off. So I'm actually going to punch that with the awl because it looks out of alignment. So then I'll take my needle. So if things like that happen, just don't panic. Just take a second. You've got, nothing's going to fall apart. You're still holding this. So you're okay to just do it. All right, so we're going to start on the inside. Okay, and we're going to be sewing through the cover and through the sections. Okay, so I'm going to start with my needle on the inside. I'm going to come out the first hole. And I'm going to pull my thread until I have a tail, like a little bit of a tail, like 2 or 3 inches on the inside. So I just want to make sure I still have enough because we're going to end up tying this off later. And then I'm going to come out the same hole again. So I'm really just taking my thread around the bottom of the book like that. So I'm going to come out the hole again. And that's going to kind of lock it on, lock it in place anyway. And I just want to make sure my tail is staying there. Okay. And then I just pull it taut like that. Okay. All right. Okay, and then now I am going to go in the next hole. I'm trying to think if I go around twice. No, I don't. Not for the first one. So I'm going to go in the next hole, and I've got to go through the book, through the cover, and through the inside. That's why you want to open those holes so that you can be sure that you're getting into the right spot and that you're not missing the hole when you go through. And then out the next hole and out the cover. And then in the next hole, in the cover and in the next hole. And then out. And then you're going to go around the top of the book and out the hole. I like to make sure I'm on top of the thread, not below it. I don't want it to cross. Like this, okay? So the first section, you're out that last hole. And here's one of the tips that I would suggest to you is that make sure that you make that stitch around the top of every section. That's something that people forget to do. And if you look, I can't show you one that's not done, but this is what it looks like. And you want to see this. You want to see a stitch at every station. Every section has a stitch going into it on each end of the book. So if you get to the end of the section and you don't know what to do, look at the top of the book and think about what you've got to do to make that stitch happen. That may not make a whole lot of sense right now, but once you've sewn with me, it will make more sense if you're making another one later. Okay, so I'm out the last hole. I've made that stitch on the inside, on the top of the book. So then I'm going to fold this section down, and I'm going to take a second. I'm going to bone fold it down. I want to make sure that it's up against the spine pretty tight. I may have to maneuver it later, so I'm not going to get too crazy with that, but I just want to make sure it's down pretty low, down to the, that station that we punched. Okay, so now I can add the next section. I'm outside here. So when I add the next section on, and I've done that same thing where I had them all flipped towards me and I flip them away, and then one at a time I'm going to work on them. So now I flip this one towards me, open it up. I'm going to go ahead and open all the holes so I can make sure that I'm ready when I get there. Okay, so I just like take the needle in and out, that's all. Then I line this up, and now when I add this next one on, I'm not going to go into the hole here. I'm actually going to go around the top. So I'm going to go from the outside around into the next section and out the hole. So like this. That's how I'm adding in that piece at this end. So now I've got a stitch like that on the outside, and I've got a stitch inside and across the top of the book, which is the important thing. Okay, and now I'm going to just sew in and out, and you can see now my stitches on the cover for the first section are every other one like this, and now when I come back it's going to be the opposite. So there's going to be a stitch here, not here, a stitch here, not here. Okay, so I'm going to go through the cover. I'm outside right now, came out the cover, go into the next hole. Sometimes I can't find it, so I'll just put my needle in from the inside just to find it. There it is. To line it up like that, just to find the hole, and then I'll pull it out and then come back to what I was doing, which is I'm on the outside of the book and going into that hole and pull my thread through. And now I come out the next hole. This one I can see the hole, it's right there. Sometimes you can't see it. And then I come out this hole. Okay, so now here's one. This is because it's an odd number, it's going to be different. Or is this the same? I can't, now I'm like, did we already do this? Maybe we did this step. Just make sure you're not doing things like that, hooking the corner. Just be aware. So we've got to put a stitch at the end of this section. So I have to go around like that. Oh, I think it is the same. And then I'm outside, so I made my little stitch here. I'm going to close that section because I made my finished stitch. And sometimes I'll just use my finger and not my bone folder for that. I'm just bone folding. I'm pushing it down. I'm just using my finger to do it. And then I'm going to add the next section on. And we're going to go around and into the section. So we're doing it like this. Oh, I just realized, well, before we do that, hold on, getting ahead of myself. Punch, not punch, but open up the holes with the needle. It's so helpful to do this. And now put it in place. And then from the outside, I'm going to wrap around to the inside and come out the hole. And come out the cover. And I'm just giving it I just want it to be snug, so I'm just pulling it taut, not tight, but taut, and making sure it's in place. And then I go into the next hole. And I'm working like this. I just don't look at the inside while I'm sewing. I don't need to, because, I mean, I just want to make sure things aren't getting hung up. You know how it did on the corner a while ago? But I don't need to watch the inside while I'm sewing. I'm just make sure I pull it taut. And sometimes I'll just kind of glance in there to make sure everything's right. But all the sewing is really happening on the spine. So I'm inside the book, coming out the cover again. And here's the next hole. I can see it. Go in and come out. And then I've got to make a stitch to finish off the top of this book. So I go around and out the same hole. That's it. Then I'm done with that section once I finish that little stitch at the top. And I'm just bone folding it down, but with my finger because it doesn't need the bone folder right now. And then I'm ready to add the next section. So I'm outside the cover, just like I am. So it's the same on each end. So I think what it is with an odd number stations, it's the same way that you add at each end. With an even number of sewing stations, it does change from end to end. So I'm kind of glad we did this with the 5 this time, because I think it makes it a little more difficult to remember what you're doing if it's not the same on each end. But it's also good to know how to do. So, but that handout that I've given you guys, if you want to explore that, it does explain. And once you've done the stitching once, the diagram will make more sense to you. Okay, so I punched and opened the holes with the needle. So now I'm just adding on the new section from the outside. I come around the top and out the same hole. Out that first hole, I should say. And you can see the sewing starting to make that little pattern on the spine. Okay. And then out. Gotta finish the stitch. So you gotta come out again, make that little finishing stitch at the end of the book. And then don't get too crazy. I do that sometimes, pull it too tight and start to peel back the paper. So pull it taut, but not tight. Gently push it down and then add your next section. Oh, take a second, open up the holes. And I'm just sliding my needle along on the inside, poking it through. Okay, from front of the book, from the outside, I go around into this section and out the cover. This is how I'm adding on the section. And I like to be very conscious of keeping my stitches stacking on top of each other. If you think about the spine, they're stacking and not crossing over, because that looks really messy. If they start to kind of over, like a little X right there, it doesn't look good. You know, if it happens, of course, it's still going to work. It just doesn't look as nice. Okay, so I'm out that first hole. I've got a stitch at the top. I go in the next hole. So you can imagine if you got good at this sewing, you could quickly make a bunch of books. And they're, you know, the only thing you'd have to invest in is the paper for the inside. That's why I use like packing paper and things like that sometimes. You know, otherwise it ends up in the recycling. Just a little bit of work to flatten it out. It's no big deal. Okay, so I'm at the end again, so I'll make my stitch. See, now that one I started to do, that little crossover, so you don't want that. So I'm gonna loop my thread underneath my needle so that it's on top. Okay, that's the end of that. Give it a little gentle fold here. How many more do we have? 3, just 3 more. So we got plenty of room. What I'm talking about is here for 3 more sections to go on. That's what the difficulty can be if you don't measure correctly and you don't make a good guess at how thick the spine should be. Okay, so I'm outside. Now I'm gonna take the next section, take my needle, open up the holes, like that. And then lay it in place, come around over the top and out the hole. Okay. Then into the next one. Out the next hole. And I'm out here and then into the next one. If I ever feel resistance, I just go in, open the hole better so I can see it. And then out here. And then around and out. Okay. Finished that. And then add the next one. And the holes. And I go around into the book there and out the cover. And then into the next section. And out. And out. And around and out. Sure my needle's on top. Okay. Got the last one to do. So see, it's a pretty simple sewing. It's really adding the sections that can be a little bit confusing, but once you've got it, especially with this one with the odd number holes, you got it because it's going to be the same on each end. Just opening the holes one more time and then add in that section. Out the cover. And then in. Now here, right at the edge, you can kind of see, it's a little bit hard to see it because we're right there up against where we punched. So you might need to kind of open it up again and see where you're going, make sure, whoops. Uh-oh, something happened, wait. Adding in? Something's wrong. Okay, wait, I did something weird. Oh, I think I should have been on the outside. Hold on, let me back up. Did I do a stitch? Yeah, okay, so sorry, I was out already and I was trying to go around again. Okay, I did the first stitch and then I started thinking about this, how I couldn't see the hole, and I think I just went through it instead. Yeah, so open up the hole if you need to, and then you're gonna put your stitch in like that. Sorry about that. Then out. And here again, you might need to open that up because I couldn't see it because it's kind of at the edge of where we punched and it's a little bit shaggy. So in and then out. And then you've got to put a stitch here at the end. So this is a little bit tricky because you really want to tie off here. You don't want to go back out the cover. So here we are. We just need to make that ending stitch right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to tie a knot with the stitch. So we're going to go around just one time and then tie on the inside. So you're going to open up the inside of the book with that loose thread, and you're going to come around and you're going to put your needle underneath the thread above. This is kind of tricky to do. I'm not going to lie. This is hard. So you're pulling that stitch. So here's the stitch out here that you're just finishing with. And now you've got to make a little knot. So that's hard to do. So you got to go under the thread above. Again, it's like you're making a little loop. And then you're trying to keep the tension and tie this knot. That's what's really kind of difficult about it. So pull it taut when you loop under the first time, and you should be okay because this is fine. And then what I usually do is just hold with my needle as I pull it and pull that knot. Okay, so just do your best there. That's not easy to do. That ending is hard. So then I'm gonna do another one. I just go around again, just doing a double knot and go through the loop. And we've tied a knot like that, but not loose, not open like that. Okay, so if you need to rewind and watch that before you do it, do back it up and watch again how I did that. Because once it's done, I can't do it anymore. Okay, so that's it. The sewing's done. The book is done, except for trimming. So now I'm going to snip that off at 1/4 inch away. And I might need my needle. So to get that needle off, because we locked it on, I can just kind of shake it. And sometimes it'll split all the way. But if not, I can also just snip close and then pull off that little bit of excess thread. No big deal. Okay, so that's how you get your needle off. Whoa. Flip. All right, so I am going to tie the knot in the front as well. So we left that tail at the very beginning, and now I'm going to tie a knot here. You can see that's where the thread is, and I'm going to do that same process. I wish I could hold it up here and do it, but I can't. Sorry about that. I can't get closer, but you can kind of watch what I'm doing. I'm going to take my needle and lift up the thread just enough, and then that's the loop. There's the loop here. I'm going to take the end of the thread through that loop in the other direction and then just pull right up against the hole, right where I came in. That's a little bit of wax right there. And then do it again. So lift the thread just a tiny bit, take the end of the thread through that loop and just pull it. And I just try to keep the knot right over the hole. And that's it. Then you cut that off 1/4 inch away from the knot. And there you go. So that's the finished sewing. I mean, it's really pretty straightforward. And you can always like slide these around a little bit at the top. Like if you need to kind of line them up a little bit better to make it even, you can just kind of gently use your thumbnail or a needle, to slide them into position like that. So you can just gently, because you're not going to have to move it very much. Like that. Okay, and so then you need to just trim the foredge. My foredge is so close, but I'm going to go ahead and do it because I only did a 1/16 of an inch difference. So we've done this before where we trimmed using the ruler. So all you got to do is lay it under your text block. Just let that middle barely show from underneath. This is with the pamphlets we did this. Just let that middle show just a tiny bit and then just hold it down real firm. Take your X-Acto and trim right up against it. And then do the other side. There's more on this side than there is on the front. So I'm lifting the whole text block and then just sliding that ruler. It's hard to, you can't see what I'm doing on camera, but let me hold it up close. So there's what I'm doing, and I'm gonna have to do it on the ground, but you can, I mean, on the mat, but you can see the ruler, and I'm like letting the ruler just barely poke out. I'm kind of pulling back the front cover so you can see. I'm gonna let that ruler just barely poke out, and then trim up against it. So that's what I'm saying. If you can't see what I'm doing, which you probably can't, but I am letting the metal ruler stick out a little bit past the text block, maybe more than just a little bit. It's like maybe a 32nd of an inch because I don't want it to be undercut at all. And then once I've got it even all the way down, I just take my knife and then cut gently because I'm trying not to push it. I'm trying not to undercut it, meaning like cut it deep and at an angle. Okay. So there you go. There's your finished book. It's trimmed flush to the foredge. And that's it. You've got a nice little, it opens really wide and lays flat if you wanted to draw in there or write, because it's not glued. It's a non-adhesive binding. It's really a nice little book. So that's the long stitch binding. All right, thanks. Bye.